it's Mena, and welcome back to my channel. Or if this is the very first video that you're seeing of me, then welcome to my channel. Please be sure to hit the subscribe button down below if you didn't already. I post every day of the week for a while, and today in this video I'm doing my top 12 knitting and crochet tutorial tips. Now, if you guys watch my channel, you know they used to give knitting and crochet tutorials, but they're not really that good, to be fairly honest, because I wasn't really good at filming at the time, because I'd always film where there was either bad lighting, the camera was not in focus, or just something happened and it just was not working out very well. So that's why I no longer do them, and plus they were very, very time consuming, and I just had a hard time doing it. So I came up with a bunch of knit and crochet tutorial tips, and I'm going to get started. And if I missed any good tips, please let me know what you guys have for any good knit or crochet tutorial tips, and I'm going to get started. So number one on my list would have to be keep the camera in focus. This was one thing I had a hard time with because I didn't know how to work my iPad at the time. My iPad I still have my iPad, but it doesn't work anymore. But I had a hard time with the camera because I couldn't keep it in focus. It wouldn't focus until I learned how to actually focus it. It took me, I think, almost a year or a few months after I got it to learn how to use the camera. And I realized I had to touch the screen in order to get it to focus. So that was one hard thing I definitely had a hard time with, was getting my camera in focus. And I didn't know what to do at the time. Number 2 on my list would have to be make sure your hands are where people can see them. So let's pretend I'm sitting at my desk, and I'm trying to do a knitting tutorial, and the best part is just make sure you have your hands where people can see them. One thing I had a hard time with was putting my hands where people could see them. A lot of people could not see what I was doing with my hands because my hands would be moving around the camera. So the important thing is when you are doing knitting or crochet tutorials, make sure your hands are in front of the camera pretty much the whole time, and don't move them around, if you saw my old knitting tutorials, I would move my hands around on the camera and people could not see what I was doing, and I just had a hard time keeping my hands in front of the camera. So that's one good tip. If you are doing knit or crochet tutorials, just make sure you keep your hands right in front of the camera so people can see what you're doing. I apologize, that wasn't really very good angled. I'm filming at my dresser. I'd film at my desk, but my computer's on my desk charging. Number 3 on my list would have to be use a bright or light colored worsted weight yarn. So right here I have some yarn samples. This is a light colored worsted weight yarn. It's a baby blue, and then I have a baby green yarn. This is not worsted weight, so it's kind of the only bright colored yarn I could see in my stash right now. So it's a baby weight, so don't use this if you're doing a tutorial. The important thing is to use a worsted weight because it's nice and thick, and then you can see what you're doing, and then other people can see what you're doing because it's very helpful. Never work with dark yarns when it comes to knitting tutorials because not a lot of people can tell what you're doing. I know because I've gotten several complaints for using dark yarns while doing knitting tutorials. Number 4 on my list would have to be work in an area that has good lighting. So as you can see, this part of my room does not really have the best lighting. I used to do a bunch of my knitting tutorials here at my desk because it was the only place I could do it in my room, because if I did it downstairs it was very distracting because there were people moving around and it was just very loud and noisy and people were talking, so it was super hard for me to do knitting tutorials downstairs in my house. But sometimes this was not really the best place for me to do tutorials because this did not have very good lighting at night, but the lighting was fine during the day. My room is right near the window right there, so it made it sometimes hard for me to do my knitting tutorials at night because the lighting was so bad. But during the day it had mainly had good lighting. Number 5 on my list would have to be know the terminology for knitting and crocheting. This is what I've noticed about some people who do knitting or crochet tutorials. They don't explain what stitch they're doing, so it's very confusing to actually tell what they're doing if they're just showing you and not really explaining things. But the important thing is, like, you need to know the terminology for knitting and crocheting, because not a lot of people understand what you're doing unless you say what stitches they are. I know there's some people that have certain ways to say the things, like TracedTraceyBeauty does not beauty. She does a bunch of crochet tutorials. They're fairly good. But I think she just needs to start saying the terminology. I apologize. I'm not trying to say she does bad tutorials. I just think she needs to say the terminology, because I feel like not a lot of people would understand what she's doing just by watching her. She kind of needs to explain what the stitches are too. And she mainly does do pretty good tutorials when she does her close up, but sometimes she did some of her videos kind of far away, so it was kind of hard to see what she was doing. So it's always important to know the terminology for knitting and crocheting, because not a lot of people actually understand by just showing them and you just explaining what you're doing. You just need to say exactly what stitches they are, because there's a lot of people who will get confused on the stitches because they don't know the names of the stitches. Number 6 on my list would have to be don't use yarn with a lot of texture. This is a yarn with not texture. As you can see, it's like a plain kind of like thick worsted weight yarn, and it doesn't have any texture on it, and that's a good thing because it's easier for people to see what you're doing so they don't get confused. And here's another yarn that doesn't have texture on it. It's just a plain solid colored worsted weight yarn. These are great for when you want to do tutorials, because you never want to work with yarn that is very textured, because you just can't see what you're doing and it's very difficult if you use a lot of texture, and not a lot of people can tell what you're doing. Number 7 on my list would have to be use a chunky weight yarn and large needles or crochet hook. So I don't really have a chunky weight yarn on me at the moment. So I don't have a chunky weight yarn on me at the moment, but I'm going to pretend this is a chunky weight yarn because it's nice and thick and you can see what you're doing. And then I have some size 13 knitting needles. These are pretty great for beginners, beginner knitters, or if you're giving tutorials, because then people can actually really see what you're doing. And then if you're doing a crochet tutorial, it's always important to use a large crochet hook. This is a size J, 6 millimeter, or an J and our number 10 hook. Or in England, this is a 6 millimeter hook. So it's very easy to see your stitches with this type of hook. And then I have a pair of size 17 knitting needles. These are a lot bigger than the needle size that is recommended on my yarn, which is the size 10. These are great for when you're doing knitting tutorials as well, because then you can see your stitches and other people can see your stitches as well. Number 8 on my list would have to be don't show too much of every single detail. Now this is one thing I've noticed that a lot of people have a tendency to do, is they show too much of every detail and they make their tutorials super long, and some people don't want to watch them. I know I definitely did, and that was very, very hard for a lot of people to watch my tutorials, because a lot of them would get super long and many people did not like them just because they were so long. long because I was just showing every detail, because back then I couldn't edit my videos because I didn't have an editing system at the time. Number 9 on my, so that's the important thing, is just make sure your videos don't have too much of every single detail, because then people won't watch them. Number 9 on my list would have to be keep your tutorials around 10 to 8 minutes long if you're doing your video in parts. Now this is one thing I always had to do was because like sometimes it would take me a while to knit up a whole row depending on how many stitches I had for my project. Because like if you saw my old infinity scarf tutorial that I made, it would take me a while because I casted on so many stitches, so I was only able to knit up to a certain amount of stitches before the video got too long, so I would have to stop it at 10 or 12 minutes because I didn't want people to get bored. So if you are doing your videos and you don't have an editing system, just keep them in parts so then you don't make your video too long. Number 10 on my list would have to be, if you're doing a pattern you found on YouTube and its directions, link them in the video. So this is a good idea. I know a lot of people will do this if they find a certain pattern that they're doing online and they've got it from a website. You can link the video and description box, because that'll be good, because not a lot of people really understand if they watch over and over again. Some do better if they read instructions. I know I definitely do better in both watching videos and reading instructions because I'm a visual learner. But if you do better with reading instructions, then that's totally fine. Just look for the link for the pattern in the description box down below if you get confused. Number 11 on my list would have to be, make sure you're doing only free patterns mainly. Now, I know some people will do patterns you have to buy online, but I think it mainly depends on the person who made up the patterns. So some people will link patterns down below. Most people choose to not do patterns that are paid for because I know there's a lot of people around the world that probably don't want to spend money to do a pattern. I know I definitely don't like spending money on patterns. I'd rather work with free patterns rather than have to spend my money on a pattern. I feel like it's just a waste of money, to be honest, because sometimes you're working on something that doesn't work for you, and I just personally like using free patterns because I feel like free patterns are just much easier in my opinion rather than having to buy a pattern. I think it's just a huge waste of money. Number 12 on my list would have to be, put instructions in the description box. Now this is one thing that I pretty much always did whenever I did my knitting tutorials, is I would always put my instructions for my patterns in the description box down below, so just in case people would get confused or they would get lost, and so I would explain exactly what to do with the instructions, and I mark them all down in steps so then people would know where they were at. So that is a good helpful tip. If people have a hard to get confused while watching the video, just put the instructions in the description box so then people understand what you're doing and everything and how the pattern works. So that's an important rule to help other people too. Okay, so those are my top 12 knitting and crochet tutorial tips. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I post every day of the week for all, and I apologize this video is so long, but thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I post every day of the week for all, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!